I'm going to give just a very brief history of fintechs, because really in the last 10 years, although it's very small period of time, fintech also went through very, very interesting cycles. Fintechs, when they went to the banks and looked at the most lucrative service, like a payment service, which has very high margin, and where the banks are not using the data strategically and whatever. They developed this service, packaged it, put it on the cloud, offered it to the customers. But then what? You have a payment fintech and they're doing well, but where is their growth? What they should be doing? Then you end up with looking at another service in the bank and see, okay, can we go and offer this service? And so they start chipping off the bank's service by service. The problem is we found that the banks did react to that. They came and said, you know what, we're not going to let the fintechs take all the lunch. There was two reactions. One, from the banks, they start focusing on digital. Culture in banks is a huge issue, and Brother Ahmed talked about that, and this is really important. That's what slowed them down. So a lot of banks start recreating themselves from inside, changing the culture so they can offer some amazing digital services that compete with fintechs. The other reaction came from the regulators, to answer your question. The regulators found that this is very lucrative for the economy. This is an amazing thing that can actually help our economies. A lot of central banks, especially in the region, you look at the Central Bank of Bahrain, Central Bank of UAE, Central Bank of Saudi Arabia, they start looking at this as an opportunity to increase the pie, the size of the pie. So what they did is they said, we want to make it simpler for those fintechs to actually play a part. So they copied what was happening around the world, which is the open API. And what the open API really does, it forces the bank to open their data to the fintech so the fintechs can have a fair competition. So they started actually putting regulations. I think it's just less than a month ago, Saudi Arabia just announced that they have a full open API framework for fintechs to actually use. We know that some of those central banks in the region also have sandbox. You talked, Brother Mustafa, about sandboxes. Sandbox, yes, they are opening the sandbox, making it very easy to plug in your fintech to that sandbox. And if you do, then you can actually meet all the regulations and you can talk open API to the banks and all that. So the regulators are pushing. Are they really pushing in the right way or the wrong way? I'm going to preserve my judgment on that, but I do believe that they're taking the subject very seriously. So the banks are taking it very seriously, and you see a lot of initiative. If you go to the banks around the region and you ask, what's the number one priority on your list of priorities, almost all of them will say digital would be either one or number two. If it's number two, guess what's number one? It's basically security. Because to go with digital and offer digital outside, you have to secure your network. So security and digital are the two most important initiatives, and they are correlated and they are related to each other. Then the central banks priority, if you look at all the central banks priorities, they're all trying to educate themselves about these new technologies and this fintechs and how can they actually help this fintech ecosystem to play in their countries. You even saw some central banks go more aggressive and looking at digital currencies, no movement on the crypto currencies, but at least digital currencies, which is a reflection of a fiat currency. They're actually offering digital currency. Why you offer digital currency? Because you want the digital services, such as payment, to actually be done through those digital currencies, and you don't have to actually go and deal with the traditional currency. So there's a lot of activities happening, and they all kind of happening in the same time, supporting each other, which is working for the fintechs. The problem that I see is, if you look at the fintechs in the past, they were flying solo, and they thought that they can. I actually was in some sessions in 2015, 16, and even 17, where some people, naive enough, they said, oh, the fintechs will replace the banks. And I start smiling, and I knew that's not going to happen. And finally, the fintechs got this mindset that we need to cooperate with the banks. We need to partner with the banks. So they became, instead of a competitor, they became an enabler to services. And you see the banks looking at the fintechs all of a sudden, instead of looking at them as competitors, they start actually looking at them as partners. So you see this happening all around the world and definitely in the region, where a lot of banks are supporting some kind of hackathons and they're doing competition with the fintechs and start to select the best fintechs to partner with. I think the amazing part is more than 50% of the funding that's going into the fintechs is actually coming from the banks, which is very surprising. And this is, by the way, a phenomena around the world. It's not private equities and it's not venture capitalists. It's actually the banks going in and putting a huge amount of investment into blockchain fintechs, into AI fintechs and all that. Because if you invest into these fintechs, then you have access to their innovation and to their ability. You can actually bring that technology in-house. And some of the large banks around the world, like Bank of America, like Citibank, they're actually investing heavily in fintechs that are playing in that space. So I think the ecosystems are forming, the partnerships are forming, and the picture is kind of getting complete to allow us to go to the next phase, which is a phase based on, again, local ecosystems, regional ecosystems, international ecosystems. They're all collaborating and partnering to offer you the best service that's immersed inside your life. And I can see you have basically in 5 years, not knowing what banks and what financial institutions are actually doing your transaction. You're just happening. You go and buy something and do something, and the financial transaction is happening. And it could be 3-4 partners actually partnered to complete that transaction. Similar to what's happening today with the SWIFT and the Visa and all that, but you will not even see that. It will be like hidden and emerge. So the AI and the new technology will allow you to have very complicated systems, but with very simple interface. So the user will see very simple interface with these services, but behind these services, very complex ecosystem that talks to each other and work and make your life much easier. Very exciting world we're coming into. And just one final statement about the big technologies. I warned, and Brother Mustafa, you were with me on some of the chat groups and stuff. I warned a while ago about the big technologies. And I do believe what's happening with WhatsApp in the last 2 weeks, where they changed the regulations and their access to data, and they're offering the data to Facebook, is a fear that I believe we're allowing these big techs. I know they have the money, I know they have the reach, but I do believe they are a high risk and a very high risk to the region. And I believe now, I sent today, I think you read it, that India just read, they were one of the first partners, India, to WhatsApp and WhatsApp payments. Now they're raising the red flag and saying, no, we reject the new policy, confidentiality policy, and we want you to change that. Because that's exactly what's going to happen in this world. If you allow these large, big techs to come into your markets, it's going to be almost impossible for the fintechs and the banks to compete. And then they put their own policies, and then you will end up with the top 4 or 5 big techs, as Brother Ahmed say, owning half the world. And this is, by the way, not far off at all.